How can you be so evil? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to upset you.
Picture this. A 10-year-old girl standing in the middle of an airplane aisle, tears streaming down her face, screaming at a flight attendant while her 6-year-old brother clings to her leg, terrified. Passengers are pulling out their phones, recording every second. The flight attendant's hand is already reaching for the phone to call security. And this little girl, voice breaking, shouts the words that would change everything. He's not being bad. He can't talk. Why won't anyone listen to me? How did a simple family trip turn into a viral moment 30,000 feet in the air? Well, to understand that, we need to go back 72 hours, to a small apartment where a little girl was carrying a weight no 10-year-old should ever have to bear. Sarah Fletcher woke up at 6:30 in the morning, just like she did every single day. But this wasn't a normal Thursday. This was the day that would change everything. She tiptoed across the small bedroom she shared with her 6-year-old brother, Desmond, and knelt beside his bed. Instead of shaking him awake or calling his name like most sisters would, Sarah did something different. She gently tapped his shoulder 3 times, their special signal, and when his eyes fluttered open, her hands began to move in careful, deliberate patterns. Sign language. Because Desmond couldn't talk. He was nonverbal, had been his entire life, and Sarah had learned every sign, every gesture, every way to communicate with the little brother she loved more than anything in this world. Desmond smiled when he saw her, clutching his stuffed elephant, a worn, faded thing he called Trunk, and Sarah's heart squeezed the way it always did. 8 months. It had been 8 months since their mother died from cancer, and in those 8 months, Sarah had become more than just a big sister. She'd become Desmond's voice, his protector, his entire world. She helped him get dressed, buttoning his favorite blue shirt with the airplanes on it because today was special. Today they were actually going to fly on a real airplane for the very first time. She made breakfast, simple cereal and toast, and packed his picture board into her backpack, the laminated cards with images that helped Desmond communicate when signs weren't enough. As she moved through their tiny apartment kitchen, Sarah passed the photographs hanging on the walls. Her mother's smile frozen in time, watching over them. The front door opened and their father, Ronald Fletcher, stumbled inside. His janitorial uniform was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 8 months. Because he had been working double shifts at the hospital, picking up every extra hour he could, just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. "Morning, baby girl," Ronald said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "You get Desmond ready?" "Yes, Daddy," Sarah replied, stirring the cereal. "Everything's packed. I triple-checked." Ronald pulled her into a hug, holding on maybe a second too long. "Your mama would be so proud of you, you know that? So strong." Sarah felt the familiar sting behind her eyes but blinked it away. She had to be strong. Someone had to be. "Daddy, are you sure the seats are okay?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual, but Ronald heard the worry underneath. He sighed. "Baby, I wish we could all sit together, I really do. But those tickets cost almost double, and with Grandma's birthday and the bills." He trailed off, guilt washing over his face. "I'll be just a few rows back. You can handle Desmond for a few hours, right? You always do." Sarah nodded, but her stomach twisted. A few hours on an airplane, in a new environment, with all those people and sounds and everything Desmond wasn't used to. What if something went wrong? What if he got scared and she couldn't calm him down? What if people didn't understand? After Ronald went to catch a few hours of sleep before their afternoon flight, Sarah pulled out the stack of papers she'd printed at the library 3 days ago. Articles about air travel with special needs children. FAA regulations about passengers requiring assistance. Highlighted sections about sensory-friendly practices and passenger rights. She'd studied these pages like they were the most important test of her life. Because in a way they were. At the airport, Sarah's careful preparation met the chaos of reality head-on. The security line was loud. Too loud. Beeping machines, shouting TSA agents, hundreds of people talking at once, shuffling bags, removing shoes, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Sarah watched Desmond's face carefully, seeing the signs she'd learned to recognize over the years. His eyes were getting wider, his breathing faster. His hands started to flap at his sides, a self-soothing motion that helped him process the overwhelming sensory input flooding his 6-year-old brain. And people were staring. Of course they were staring. They always stared. "Next," the TSA agent barked, and Sarah gently guided Desmond forward, holding his picture board in one hand and his medical documentation in the other. "Boarding pass and ID," the agent said without looking up. Sarah handed over their boarding passes. "Ma'am, my brother can't verbally respond to questions. He's nonverbal." I have his doctor's letter here. Kid, just put your bag on the belt and walk through, the agent interrupted, still not making eye contact. Desmond stood frozen at the metal detector, overwhelmed, his hands flapping more intensely now. Son, you need to walk through the detector, the agent said, louder this time, as if volume would somehow make Desmond understand better. He can't hear you the way you think, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She held up the picture board, showing Desmond the image for walk forward, and safe. She signed to him, gentle and clear. Desmond looked at her, his anchor in this storm of confusion, and slowly stepped through the detector. The agent finally looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Does he have documentation? Yes, sir. Sarah handed him the letter from Desmond's pediatrician, explaining his autism diagnosis, his nonverbal status, his needs. Behind them, Ronald Fletcher watched his 10-year-old daughter advocate for her brother with the competence of someone 3 times her age, and tears welled in his eyes. Pride and guilt mixed together in equal measure. Pride because she was so capable, so compassionate, so strong. Guilt because she had to be. They made it through security smoothly after that, and Sarah felt a small victory bloom in her chest. One obstacle down. If only she knew what was waiting for them at 30,000 feet. At the boarding gate, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor with Desmond, reviewing the airplane safety cards she'd requested from the gate agent. Her hands moved in practiced sign language, explaining seat belts and oxygen masks and emergency exits. Desmond watched her hands with complete focus, then pointed excitedly at the airplane visible through the massive windows. His first airplane. His face was pure joy. Sarah smiled, but her ears caught a conversation happening at the desk. The gate agent was stressed, talking quickly into her headset. Overbooked by 6 and we're down 2 flight attendants. It's going to be tight. Yeah, I know. Just get them boarded fast. Then she saw the flight attendants entering through the jetway. The older one, her name tag read Vivian, was snapping at the younger attendant, a girl who couldn't have been more than 24. Jenna, I don't care what your training manual says. When we're understaffed, we don't have time for hand-holding every nervous flyer. Move them through, get them seated, that's it. Jenna mumbled an apology to a passenger who'd asked a question, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Sarah's anxiety ratcheted up another notch. The flight attendants seemed stressed. The plane was overbooked. This wasn't the calm, smooth experience she'd hoped for. Ronald crouched down beside his children, and Sarah saw the worry in his eyes even as he tried to smile. Okay, you two. Remember, I'm going to be in seat 11D. Just a few rows back. Sarah, you've got this, sweetheart. You're the best big sister in the whole world. I know, Daddy, Sarah said, trying to sound confident. But her hands were gripping her notebook so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. They boarded the plane, Sarah holding Desmond's hand, carrying both their small backpacks. The moment Desmond stepped into the aircraft, his eyes went wide with wonder. The rows of seats, the overhead compartments, the curved ceiling. This was the inside of the airplanes he'd seen in books and videos in his dreams. Sarah found their seats, 14B and 14C, middle and window. She let Desmond take the window seat because she knew he'd need something to focus on, something beautiful to anchor him when things got overwhelming. As she helped him buckle his seatbelt, checking it twice to make sure it was secure but not too tight, Sarah took a deep breath. They'd made it this far. Just a few more hours. Just keep Desmond calm, keep him safe, get to Grandma's house in Atlanta. Simple. But as other passengers began filing down the aisle, as the energy in the cabin shifted from anticipation to impatience, as she saw a large businessman in an expensive suit glaring at the empty seat beside her like it had personally offended him, Sarah felt something twist in her gut. A warning. A premonition. This flight was going to test her in ways she couldn't even imagine yet. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong, but no one around you seemed to care? Drop your stories in the comments below, because what happens next on this flight will make you think about advocacy, compassion, and what it really means to be someone's voice in a world that doesn't always want to listen. And if you're invested in Sarah and Desmond's story, if you want to see how this 10-year-old girl faces down an entire airplane full of adults who don't understand what her brother needs, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. For exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, Sarah Fletcher thought everything might actually be okay. Desmond was buckled into seat 14C, his face pressed against the airplane window like it was the most magical thing he'd ever seen. And maybe it was. The ground crew loading baggage, the fuel trucks, the other planes taxiing past. His eyes tracked every movement with pure wonder. Sarah sat in 14B, the middle seat, and 14A beside her was still empty. Maybe she thought maybe they'd get lucky. Maybe that seat would stay empty and they'd have a little extra room, a little breathing space for the 5-hour flight to Atlanta. But luck, Sarah was learning, wasn't something the Fletcher family had much of anymore. Mitchell Grimes appeared in the aisle at the last possible moment before the cabin doors closed, and you could tell everything you needed to know about him in the first 5 seconds. Expensive suit, already wrinkled from travel. Designer carry-on bag that he shoved into the overhead compartment with more force than necessary, knocking into other passengers' belongings without apologizing. The kind of man who wore his irritation like a badge of honor, like the world had personally inconvenienced him by continuing to exist. He looked at his boarding pass, then at row 14, then at Sarah and Desmond, and his face did something that made Sarah's stomach drop. "Great," Mitchell muttered, loud enough for them to hear. "Just what I needed on a 5-hour flight." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she'd learned from years of dealing with people who looked at Desmond like he was a problem instead of a person. She turned her attention back to her brother, helping him adjust his seatbelt, making sure Trunk the elephant was secure in his lap. "Ignore it. Don't engage. Just focus on Desmond." Mitchell dropped into seat 14A with a heavy sigh that seemed designed to communicate his suffering to everyone within earshot. He immediately pulled out an expensive-looking tablet, his body language screaming that he wanted nothing to do with the children sitting 18 inches away from him. The cabin speakers crackled to life, and Vivian's voice filled the airplane, beginning the safety demonstration. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the flight attendants as we review the safety features of this aircraft." Her voice was loud, amplified through the speakers, bouncing off the curved walls of the cabin. And Desmond, who processed sound differently than most people, who experienced the world through a sensory lens that could turn ordinary noise into physical pain, immediately clapped his hands over his ears. His face crumpled with discomfort and Sarah's heart lurched. She'd prepared for this. She knew this might happen. Her hands moved quickly, pulling out Desmond's picture board, showing him the image that meant, "loud but temporary," and "it's okay." She signed to him, her movements gentle and reassuring, and slowly Desmond's hands lowered. His eyes were wide and uncertain, but he trusted his sister. He always trusted his sister. Mitchell let out another one of those pointed sighs, the kind that wasn't really about breathing at all, and Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. But she said nothing. Just kept her focus on Desmond. The safety demonstration ended. The flight attendants took their seats. The captain's voice came through the speakers announcing their departure, and Sarah felt the plane begin to move, pushing back from the gate. This was it. Desmond's first time flying. Their first trip since their mother died. The first time Sarah had sole responsibility for her brother in a situation she couldn't control. No pressure at all. The engines began to roar. Now, if you've ever flown before, you know that sound. The building whine of jet engines spooling up, the increasing vibration through the fuselage, the sense of enormous power barely contained. For most people it's exciting, maybe a little nerve-wracking. But for Desmond Fletcher, whose brain processed sensory information in ways that could turn ordinary experiences into overwhelming assaults, it was terrifying. His hands gripped the armrests. His body began to rock, forward and back, a self-soothing motion that helped him regulate when the world became too much. And small sounds started escaping from his throat, not words because Desmond didn't have words, but distressed vocalizations that Sarah knew meant he was scared. She immediately took his hand, squeezing gently, and her other hand moved in the sign she'd practiced 1,000 times. "Safe. You're safe. I'm here. Sister is here." She showed him the picture on his board, the one that meant safe, with a simple drawing of a smiling face in a house. But the engines kept getting louder. The plane was accelerating down the runway now, faster and faster, and Desmond's rocking intensified, his sounds getting louder. "Can't you keep him quiet?" Mitchell muttered, not even looking up from his tablet. Sarah's head snapped toward him, and for a moment she forgot to be polite. "He's scared. It's his first time flying." Mitchell's eyes flicked toward her, cold and dismissive. "Well, some of us are trying to work." Work. This man was complaining about a scared 6-year-old because he was trying to work. Sarah felt words rising in her throat, sharp and angry, but the plane chose that moment to leave the ground, and Desmond's grip on her hand became almost painfully tight. His little fingers squeezed so hard she could feel her bones grinding together, and she winced but didn't pull away. Would never pull away. "It's okay, Des," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her over the engine noise, even though he processed verbal information differently anyway. "We're flying now. We're actually flying." The plane climbed steeply and through the window the ground fell away. Buildings became toys, cars became ants, and the world transformed into a patchwork quilt of fields and roads and rivers catching the afternoon sunlight. And something magical happened. Desmond stopped rocking. His distressed sounds faded. His grip on Sarah's hand loosened and his face, his beautiful, expressive face, lit up with pure wonder. He pressed closer to the window, his eyes tracking the clouds they were rising through, watching as the airplane punched through into brilliant sunshine above a sea of white. Sarah felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Desmond signed to her, his small hands forming the gesture they'd practiced, happy. Sarah smiled, her first real smile since boarding. Yes, Des. Happy. For exactly 27 minutes, everything was perfect. Jenna, the young flight attendant with kind eyes and an apologetic smile, came down the aisle with the beverage cart 30 minutes into the flight. She'd clearly noticed the earlier tension with Mitchell, because she made a point of being extra warm when she reached row 14. "What would you like, sweetie?" she asked Sarah, and there was genuine kindness in her voice. "Apple juice for both of us, please," Sarah replied, grateful for the small grace of being treated like a person instead of a problem. Jenna poured 2 apple juices into plastic cups, placed them on the tray tables and moved on. Desmond reached for his juice, eager and excited because apple juice was his favorite and this was all part of the grand adventure of flying. His hand missed the cup by half an inch. Everything that happened next seemed to occur in slow motion and at lightning speed all at once. The plastic cup tipped. Apple juice sloshed over the rim, cascading across the tray table, and before Sarah could grab it, before she could stop the inevitable, the juice poured directly onto Mitchell Grimes's tablet. The expensive tablet that was sitting on his tray table. The tablet he'd been working on for the past half hour. The tablet that was now dripping with apple juice. Mitchell's reaction was instantaneous and explosive. "Are you kidding me?" he roared, loud enough that passengers 3 rows away turned to look. "Do you know how much this costs? Do you have any idea?" Desmond recoiled like he'd been struck. His whole body went rigid, then began rocking violently, and the sounds coming from his throat shifted from content to distressed in a heartbeat. His hands flapped frantically at his sides, his breathing became rapid and shallow, and Sarah recognized all the signs of a major sensory overload response. "I'm so sorry," Sarah stammered, grabbing napkins trying to soak up the juice, her hands shaking. "He didn't mean to, it was an accident. This is ridiculous." Mitchell was standing now, holding his dripping tablet like evidence in a trial. "Where are your parents? Kids like this shouldn't be flying alone. He clearly can't control himself." And that's when something shifted in Sarah Fletcher. That phrase, "kids like this," said with such contempt, such casual cruelty, as if Desmond was somehow less than human because he experienced the world differently. Her voice came out shaking but defiant. "He's not alone. I'm here. And he's allowed to fly." "Allowed?" Mitchell scoffed. "He just destroyed a $1,500 tablet. You're what, 10? You can't handle a special needs kid on an airplane." By now, other passengers were staring. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked annoyed. And Desmond was spiraling deeper into distress, his rocking so violent Sarah worried he might hurt himself, his sounds so loud they filled the cabin. And then Vivian appeared. The lead flight attendant materialized in the aisle with the kind of presence that comes from 28 years of dealing with every possible airplane crisis. She took in the scene with quick, assessing eyes. The wet tablet, the upset businessman, the distressed child, the young girl desperately trying to hold everything together. "Is everything under control here?" Vivian asked, her voice professionally neutral. "No, it's not." Mitchell jumped in before Sarah could respond. "This child clearly has issues and she can't handle him. I paid good money for this seat and I shouldn't have to deal with this." Vivian turned to Sarah, and Sarah saw the moment the flight attendant made her judgment. Saw the way Vivian's eyes took in Desmond's rocking, his sounds, the obvious distress, and made a decision about what kind of situation this was. "Sweetheart," Vivian said, and her tone was kind but firm in a way that made Sarah's stomach drop. "Is there an adult with you on this flight?" "My dad is in seat 11D, Sarah replied, her throat tight. "I think it would be best if you moved back there with him." No. Sarah had prepared for so many scenarios but not this. Not being forced to move when they hadn't done anything wrong. "But Desmond needs the window seat," Sarah tried to explain, hearing the desperation creeping into her voice. "It helps him stay calm. The visual stimulation, it grounds him, he needs." "I'm sorry, but we can't have disruptions," Vivian interrupted gently. Other passengers have paid for a comfortable flight and he's not being disruptive. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, hot and furious and terrified all at once. He spilled by accident. He can't help his reactions, he has autism, he's nonverbal, he doesn't understand why everyone is angry. Nevertheless, Vivian continued, and Sarah could see she believed she was being reasonable, being fair, solving a problem. I need you to gather your things and move to your father's row. And that's when Ronald Fletcher appeared, pushing through the passengers crowding the aisle, his face creased with worry and that terrible guilt that Sarah had seen so often in the past 8 months. Is there a problem? Her father asked, slightly out of breath. Vivian turned to him with relief, clearly glad to have an adult to deal with instead of a 10-year-old. Sir, are these your children? Yes, ma'am. There's been an incident, and I think it would be best if they sat with you for the remainder of the flight. Sarah looked at her father, silently begging him to fight this, to stand up for them, to explain that Desmond needed the window, needed the routine they'd established, needed things to stay predictable. But Ronald Fletcher was tired. So tired. Tired from working doubles, tired from grief, tired from 8 months of fighting battles every single day. And in that moment he didn't have the energy for one more fight. I understand, he said quietly. Sarah, Desmond, let's. Dad and oh. Sarah's voice cracked. You know Desmond needs the window seat. You know what happens when his routine gets disrupted, when things don't make sense to him, you know. Sarah, Ronald said, and his voice carried a weight that made her stop. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Make it harder. As if they were the ones making it hard. As if Desmond's autism was something they were doing to other people instead of something he lived with every single day. Sarah started gathering their things with trembling hands, shoving the picture board into her backpack, reaching for trunk. But Desmond didn't understand what was happening. He was still in sensory overload, still rocking, still distressed, and when Sarah tried to unbuckle him, he grabbed onto the seat with both hands, refusing to let go. And trunk fell. The stuffed elephant tumbled from Desmond's lap onto the floor, rolling forward until it came to rest right next to Mitchell Grimes's expensive leather shoe. Sarah reached for it immediately. I'll get it, Des, it's okay, I'll. Mitchell Grimes lifted his foot and deliberately placed it on top of trunk. Just stood on it. Pinned a 6-year-old's comfort object to the floor with his shoe while that 6-year-old was having a meltdown. And he looked Sarah dead in the eye and said, maybe if you taught him to behave we wouldn't have these problems. Something inside Sarah Fletcher broke. Not broke like shattered. Broke like a dam that had been holding back 8 months of grief and responsibility and fear and exhaustion and the terrible, crushing weight of being 10 years old and responsible for another human being's entire world. Every single thing her mother would have said, would have done, every fight her mother had fought for Desmond before cancer took her away, every advocate's word and protective instinct came flooding through Sarah all at once. She stood up. All 4 feet 7 inches of her stood up in that airplane aisle, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't quiet anymore. He does behave. Sarah's voice rang through the cabin, loud enough that passengers 15 rows away could hear every word. He has autism. He's nonverbal. He can't talk. Young lady, lower your voice right now, Vivian commanded, her professional demeanor cracking into alarm. But Sarah was done lowering her voice. Done being small. Done letting people treat her brother like he was less than human. No. The word came out like a thunderclap. You're not listening. Nobody ever listens. He didn't do anything wrong. He's 6 years old and this is his first time on an airplane and everyone is treating him like he's a problem when he's just a little boy who spilled some juice. Passengers were pulling out their phones now. Recording. This was going to be all over social media in an hour. 10-year-old girl has meltdown on airplane. Child out of control. Parents can't discipline their kids. But Sarah didn't care. If you don't calm down immediately, Vivian said, her hand already reaching for the phone that would call the captain, I will have to report this incident. Call him. Sarah shouted, tears streaming down her face now, 8 months of grief and anger and love pouring out. Call whoever you want. My brother deserves to be here just like everyone else. He deserves to sit by the window. He deserves to be happy. And I'm not moving until you understand that he can't talk. Ronald tried to step in. Sarah, baby, please. But Sarah spun on her father, and the words that came out were the truest things she'd said in 8 months. No, Dad. Mom would never let anyone treat Desmond like this. Never. She fought for him every single day and now she's gone and I have to do it and nobody takes me seriously because I'm just a kid. The cabin went silent. Desmond was crying now, silent tears running down his face, still rocking, still overwhelmed, clutching at the seat because his whole world was chaos and the one person who made sense of it all, his sister, was screaming and he didn't understand why. Sarah stood there in the aisle, shaking, tears and snot running down her face, feeling like her chest was going to crack open. And that's when someone else stood up. 3 rows back, a woman with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair unbuckled her seatbelt and rose to her feet. "Excuse me," Dr. Patricia Wong said calmly but firmly. "I'm a child psychologist. May I approach? Here's what I want you to think about. When was the last time you saw someone being treated unfairly and you did something about it? Not just thought about doing something but actually stepped in? Because what's about to happen on this flight, what Dr. Wong is about to reveal, is going to change how you think about advocacy, about intervention, about being the person who stands up when everyone else stays seated. Drop a comment if you've ever been that person or if you wish you had been. And listen, if you're feeling the anger, the frustration, the absolute injustice of what just happened to Sarah and Desmond, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now because the next part of this story is going to restore your faith in humanity in ways you can't even imagine. Hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. Dr. Patricia Wong sat frozen in seat 12C, watching a 10-year-old girl fall apart in defense of her brother, and something inside her chest twisted painfully, because she recognized what was happening. She'd seen it 1,000 times in her 20 years as a child psychologist. She'd written papers about it, given lectures about it, trained other professionals to identify it. Advocacy born from desperation. A child forced into an adult role. Trauma responses disguised as defiance. But recognizing it and intervening in it were 2 different things. And Dr. Wong had learned, through painful experience, that sometimes getting involved made things worse. There was a case 7 years ago, a child she tried to help outside her professional capacity, and it had ended badly. So badly that she'd promised herself, "Stay in your lane. Observe. Don't interfere unless specifically asked." So she stayed seated, even as every instinct screamed at her to stand up. For now. Vivian turned to Ronald Fletcher with the kind of professional coldness that comes from years of dealing with difficult situations by following protocol instead of instinct. Her voice was measured, controlled, the voice of someone who believed they were being perfectly reasonable. "Sir, your children are causing a disturbance. The young man needs to be able to follow instructions and remain calm during the flight. For the safety and comfort of all passengers, I need you to take them back to your seat." Ronald looked at Vivian, then at Sarah's tear-streaked face, then at Desmond who was rocking and crying and completely overwhelmed, and you could see the defeat wash over him like a wave. His shoulders sagged. His eyes went dull. This was a man who'd fought so many battles in the past 8 months that he simply didn't have the energy for one more. "I understand," he said quietly, and those 2 words felt like a betrayal to Sarah. "I'll take them back to my row. Dad and oh." Sarah's voice was desperate now, pleading. "You know Desmond needs the window seat. You know what happens when—" "Sarah, just—" Ronald's voice cracked. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Harder. That word again. As if existing in the world with autism was something they were deliberately choosing to make difficult for everyone else. Sarah felt something crumble inside her, but she started gathering their things because what choice did she have? She was 10 years old. Her father had given up. The flight attendant had made up her mind. And apparently nobody on this entire airplane cared that they were being treated unfairly. She shoved the picture board into her backpack with shaking hands. Reached for Desmond's jacket. Started to help him unbuckle. But Desmond didn't understand what was happening. His routine was being disrupted. The window he'd been fixated on was being taken away. His sister was upset, his father was upset, everyone was upset and he didn't know why. His hands grabbed onto the seat in front of him, holding on with the desperate strength of a 6-year-old who'd learned that when things don't make sense, you hold on to what you can. And in the chaos, trunk fell again. The faded stuffed elephant hit the floor and rolled forward, coming to rest right in front of Mitchell Grimes's seat. Sarah saw it happen, saw Desmond's eyes track Trunk's fall, saw the panic that crossed her brother's face. Desmond tried to unbuckle his seatbelt, tried to lunge forward to get his comfort object, and Sarah had to physically stop him, her small hands on his shoulders. "It's okay, Des, I'll get it, just wait, I'll—" "Everyone needs to remain seated with seatbelts fastened," Vivian said sharply. "The seatbelt sign is on." Sarah's eyes flicked up to the overhead panel. The seatbelt sign was dark. Completely off. Had been off for the past 20 minutes. "No, it's not," Sarah said quietly, and even in her distress, even crying, she couldn't help but correct something that was factually wrong. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" And you could hear it in her voice, the annoyance of an adult being corrected by a child. The irritation of having her authority questioned. Never mind that Sarah was right. Never mind that the sign was literally right there, dark and dormant. Being right didn't matter when you were 10 years old and the adult had already decided you were a problem. Sarah bent down to pick up trunk, her hand reaching between the seats. And Mitchell Grimes deliberately placed his foot on top of it. His expensive leather shoe came down on that worn, beloved stuffed elephant, pinning it to the airplane floor. He looked at Sarah, made direct eye contact, and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Maybe if you taught him to behave, we wouldn't have these problems." Something inside Sarah Fletcher didn't just break. It exploded. Every ounce of grief she'd been holding for 8 months. Every moment of watching her father cry when he thought she couldn't hear. Every memory of her mother fighting tooth and nail for Desmond's rights, his dignity, his place in the world. Every single time someone had looked at her brother like he was less than human because his brain worked differently. All of it came roaring out. Sarah stood up, all 4 feet 7 inches of righteous fury, and her voice came out loud and clear and utterly unafraid. "He does behave. He has autism. He's nonverbal. He can't talk." "Young lady, lower your voice right now," Vivian commanded, her own voice rising to match Sarah's volume. But Sarah was done being quiet. Done being small. Done letting people like Mitchell Grimes treat her brother like garbage. Her tears were flowing freely now, but her voice just got louder. "No. You're not listening. Nobody ever listens. He didn't do anything wrong. He's 6 years old and this is his first time on an airplane and everyone is treating him like he's a problem when all he did was exist. When all he did was be autistic." Passengers throughout the cabin were pulling out their phones now. Recording. Always recording. Sarah could see the little red lights in her peripheral vision, could imagine the headlines already: "Out of control child throws tantrum on flight. Unruly passenger disrupts airplane." They'd never understand. The videos would never show Mitchell stepping on trunk. Would never capture the contempt in his voice. Would just show a little black girl yelling at adults. But Sarah didn't care anymore. Vivian's hand was moving toward the phone mounted on the wall, the one that connected directly to the cockpit. "If you don't calm down immediately, I will have to call the captain and we will discuss whether this flight needs to be diverted." Diverted. Turned around. The whole plane grounded because of them. Grandma's 75th birthday missed. The money for the tickets wasted. All of it ruined. And Sarah looked Vivian dead in the eye and said, "Call him. Call whoever you want. My brother deserves to be here just like everyone else. He deserves to sit by the window. He deserves to be happy. And I'm not moving until you understand that he can't talk. He can't tell you he's sorry, he can't explain what he needs, he can't defend himself, so I have Tio. I'm all he has." Ronald reached for his daughter, his voice breaking. "Sarah, baby, please." Sarah spun on her father, and the words that came out were the ones she'd been holding back for 8 months. The truth she'd never said out loud because saying it would make it real. "No, Dad. Mom would never let anyone treat Desmond like this. Never. She fought for him every single day and now she's gone and I have to do it and nobody takes me seriously because I'm just a kid." The cabin went absolutely silent. Not silent like quiet. Silent like the entire airplane was holding its breath. Desmond was crying silently beside her, his small body rocking back and forth in his seat, his hands flapping frantically at his sides in the way that helped him process overwhelming emotions. Silent tears ran down his face because he didn't understand words the way other people did, but he understood that his sister was hurting, and when Sarah hurt, Desmond hurt. Sarah stood there in the aisle, her chest heaving, her face wet with tears and probably snot, and she didn't even care. She'd said it. She'd said the thing that had been eating her alive since the funeral. That she wasn't enough. That she was just a kid trying to do what her mother had done, and nobody would ever take her seriously because she was 10 years old. Mitchell Grimes was staring at her with something that might have been shame flickering across his face, but he looked away quickly. Vivian's hand was still on the phone, but she'd gone very still. Ronald was crying openly now, standing in the aisle of an airplane crying because his 10-year-old daughter had just articulated the guilt he'd been carrying for months. And then from 3 rows back someone stood up. Dr. Patricia Wong unbuckled her seatbelt with decisive clicks and rose to her full height. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but carried the kind of authority that comes from decades of expertise. "Excuse me. I'm a child psychologist. May I approach?" Vivian turned, flustered for the first time, her professional composure cracking. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." "That child," Dr. Wong gestured to Desmond, already walking forward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, is having a sensory overload response. This situation is escalating because of a lack of understanding, not because of any misbehavior. And if you don't let me help de-escalate it, you're going to have a much bigger problem on your hands. She didn't wait for permission. She walked straight to row 14, and instead of looming over Desmond the way the adults had been doing, she knelt down, got on his level, made herself small and non-threatening. And then her hands started to move. Sign language. Fluid and practiced and perfect. Desmond's eyes went wide. His rocking slowed. Because someone who wasn't Sarah, was talking to him in his language. Dr. Wong's hands shaped the words, "You're safe. Your sister loves you. It's okay to be scared." She reached down, picked up trunk from under Mitchell's foot, and Mitchell had the decency to pull his foot back quickly, and handed the elephant to Desmond with both hands, like the precious thing it was. Desmond clutched trunk to his chest, his breathing starting to slow, his eyes locked on this stranger who understood. Dr. Wong stood up and turned to face Vivian, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the cabin. "These children have done nothing wrong. Nothing. That young girl," she pointed to Sarah, "is advocating for her disabled brother while processing profound grief. Did you know they lost their mother less than a year ago? Did anyone bother to ask why a 10-year-old is so fiercely protective? Why she's taken on a role that should belong to adults?" Vivian's expression shifted. Something softened around her eyes. "She's doing what we as adults are supposed to do, ensuring that people with disabilities are treated with dignity and respect. And instead of supporting her, instead of listening to her, everyone on this airplane has treated her like she's the problem." Dr. Wong looked around the cabin, making eye contact with the passengers who were still recording on their phones. "This young man has autism. He's nonverbal. He experiences the world through a different sensory lens than you do. A spilled drink is an accident, not a character flaw. Stimmying is a coping mechanism, not misbehavior. And his sister explaining his needs is advocacy, not disruption." Jenna, the junior flight attendant who'd been watching this entire scene unfold with increasing distress, finally found her voice. "Vivian, maybe we should." "Jenna, this isn't your call," Vivian snapped, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "But she's right," Jenna pressed, stepping forward. "They haven't violated any regulations. The boy didn't choose to spill the drink. He hasn't been violent or threatening. And everything that girl said is true, we've been treating them unfairly." Vivian looked at Jenna, then at Dr. Wong, then at Sarah who was still standing in the aisle, trembling and crying and trying so hard to be brave. And then Vivian looked at Desmond. Really looked at him. Saw a 6-year-old boy clutching a worn stuffed elephant, tears drying on his cheeks, confusion in his eyes. A little boy who just wanted to look out the window at the clouds. Who'd been excited about flying. Whose first airplane ride had turned into a nightmare because the adults around him didn't understand, didn't listen, didn't care to learn. Vivian saw her own son in Desmond. Her teenage son who struggled with ADHD, who'd been suspended from school twice this year, who she'd been so frustrated with that she'd stopped seeing him as a child who needed support and started seeing him as a problem that needed solving. And something inside Vivian Cortez broke open. "How old are you?" she asked Sarah quietly. Sarah wiped her nose with the back of her hand. 10. "And you take care of your brother?" "Someone has to." The simplicity of that answer, the weight of it, hit Vivian like a physical blow. She stood there for a long moment, the entire airplane watching her, waiting to see what she would do. This was the moment. The point where she could double down on protocol and authority, or she could choose compassion. Vivian Cortez had been a flight attendant for 28 years. She'd dealt with drunk passengers, medical emergencies, unruly travelers, and every crisis you could imagine at 30,000 feet. She'd followed the rules, enforced the policies, kept hundreds of thousands of passengers safe. But she'd never in all those years had to choose between being right and being kind. She turned to Mitchell Grimes, and when she spoke, her voice was ice. "Sir, I'm going to need you to move to another seat. I want you to think about something right now. When was the last time you changed your mind about someone after you'd already judged them? When was the last time you admitted you were wrong, especially in front of other people? Because what Vivian is about to do next is going to show you what real courage looks like, and it's not the kind of courage that comes from being loud or aggressive. It's the kind that comes from admitting you made a mistake and choosing to do better. Have you ever had to do that? Tell me in the comments." Mitchell Grimes's face went through about 5 different shades of red in the span of 3 seconds. "What?" His voice came out strangled, disbelieving. "I paid for this seat. You can't just." But Vivian Cortez wasn't done. And when she spoke again, her voice had that steel underneath it that comes from 28 years of dealing with entitled passengers who thought money meant they could treat people however they wanted. You kicked a child's comfort item, sir. You deliberately escalated a situation involving minors with disabilities. You've shown contempt and hostility toward passengers who have every right to be on this aircraft. Now, I'm offering you the choice to move voluntarily to another seat, or I can document this incident formally and have it waiting for you when we land. Your choice. The entire cabin was dead silent. Every single person was watching this confrontation unfold, phones still recording, but now the narrative was shifting. Now the story wasn't unruly child disrupts flight. Now it was something else entirely. Mitchell grabbed his tablet, still sticky with apple juice, and his bag from the overhead compartment, yanking it down with enough force that the whole bin shook. This is discrimination. This is absolutely unacceptable. I'll be reporting this to the airline, to the FAA too. The complaint forms are available at the gate, Vivian interrupted smoothly. Enjoy your new seat in 27B. 27B. The very back of the airplane. Next to the bathroom. The worst seat on the entire aircraft. Mitchell stormed down the aisle, muttering under his breath, and passengers literally pulled their feet in to avoid touching him as he passed. You could feel the shift in the cabin's energy. The man who'd been the aggressor, who'd stepped on a child's toy, who demanded that a disabled 6-year-old be removed for the crime of existing, he was being treated like the problem he actually was. And then Vivian did something that absolutely nobody expected. She knelt down, got down on her knees in the aisle of the airplane, putting herself at eye level with Sarah and Desmond, making herself small and approachable instead of looming over them with adult authority. I apologize, she said, and her voice was soft now, genuine, stripped of all that professional detachment. To both of you. I should have listened first. I should have asked questions instead of making assumptions. And I'm truly sorry. Sarah stared at her, still trembling, still tear-streaked, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Adults didn't apologize to kids. Not in Sarah's experience. Adults made decisions and kids had to live with them, fair or not. But Vivian meant it. You could see it in her eyes. May I sit here? Vivian gestured to seat 14A, the one Mitchell had just vacated. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Vivian settled into the seat, and for a moment she just sat there, looking at these two children who'd been through so much. Then she started talking, and what came out wasn't the voice of a flight attendant following protocol. It was the voice of a mother who was struggling. I have a son, Vivian said quietly. He's 15. He has ADHD. And this past year has been hard. He's been suspended from school twice. His grades are terrible. He can't seem to sit still or focus or do any of the things the teachers want him to do. And I've been so angry at him. So frustrated. She looked at Desmond, who was still clutching trunk but calming down now, his rocking gentler, his breathing more even. I've been treating my own son like he's a problem that needs fixing instead of a child who needs support. I've been so focused on rules and expectations and what he's supposed to do that I forgot about compassion. About understanding. About actually listening to what he needs instead of just telling him what I expect. Sarah watched Vivian's face, saw the tears forming in the older woman's eyes. When I saw you fighting for your brother just now, when I heard you say that your mother would never have let anyone treat him like this. Vivian's voice caught. You reminded me of the kind of parent I'm supposed to be. The kind of person I used to be before I got so tired and frustrated that I stopped seeing my son and started seeing his behavior problems. She turned to Sarah, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. You're a remarkable sister. 10 years old and you're doing what I can't even manage to do for my own child. Your mother would be so proud of you. And that did it. That broke Sarah completely. All the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright, keeping her fighting, keeping her fierce and strong and brave, it all drained out of her at once. And Sarah Fletcher, who'd been holding herself together for 8 months, who'd been playing the role of caregiver and advocate and mini-adult, finally let herself be what she actually was. A 10-year-old girl who missed her mother. She dissolved into sobs. Not the angry, defiant crying from before. This was grief, raw and overwhelming and 8 months overdue. Her whole body shook with it and she couldn't catch her breath, couldn't stop the sounds coming out of her throat. And Vivian didn't shush her. Didn't tell her to calm down. Didn't try to make it stop. She just let Sarah cry. Pulled the little girl into a hug and let her sob into her flight attendant uniform, getting it wet with tears and snot and all the grief Sarah had been holding in because someone had to be strong for Desmond. It's okay, Vivian murmured. You don't have to be strong right now. Let it out. I've got you. Ronald stood in the aisle watching his daughter finally fall apart, and he started crying too. Because he'd been so worried about Sarah, about how she'd taken on so much responsibility, about how she never cried, never complained, never asked for help. And seeing her break down was somehow a relief because it meant she was still a kid underneath all that strength. Dr. Wong approached Ronald quietly, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. She handed him a small notepad where she'd written down information. Websites, support groups, therapy options, assistance programs for families with special needs children. Your daughter is extraordinary, Dr. Wong said. But she shouldn't have to carry this alone. These resources can help. There's a support network for families like yours. Parents who understand. Siblings of autistic children who can relate to what Sarah's experiencing. Ronald took the paper with shaking hands. Thank you. I work so much and I don't know how to be both parents and... You're doing the best you can, Dr. Wong said firmly. But you don't have to do it alone. Reach out. These people want to help. Jenna, the junior flight attendant, appeared with noise-canceling headphones and a pack of coloring books. She knelt beside Desmond with a gentle smile. Hey buddy, she said softly, even though she knew he might not process her words the same way. I thought you might like these. She showed him the headphones, demonstrated how they worked, and Desmond's eyes lit up. The constant ambient noise of the airplane, the engine hum, the air circulation, the murmur of voices, it had been pressing on him this entire flight. But when he put those headphones on, the world got quieter. Calmer. He signed "Thank you" to Jenna, and her eyes filled with tears because 2 years ago she'd lost her younger sister in a car accident and she'd never gotten to say goodbye, and helping this little boy felt like maybe she could still do some good in the world. And then something unexpected happened. Other passengers started coming forward. The woman in seat 12E brought over a snack pack of cookies. For the kids, she said to Ronald. In case they get hungry. A businessman from row 9 approached, looking embarrassed. I'm sorry I didn't speak up earlier. What that man did was wrong. A teenage girl offered her tablet to Desmond. He can watch videos if he wants. I downloaded a bunch of stuff. One by one, passengers who'd sat silent during the confrontation, who'd recorded on their phones but not intervened, started trying to make amends. Started recognizing that they'd been bystanders to injustice and feeling the weight of that. Sarah, still in Vivian's arms, could hear them but couldn't quite process it. Her brain was foggy with crying, with exhaustion, with the emotional come down from the most intense experience of her young life. Vivian held her until the sobs quieted, until Sarah's breathing evened out, until the little girl finally pulled back and wiped her face with her hands. Better? Vivian asked gently. Sarah nodded, hiccuping slightly. Vivian reached into her pocket and pulled out a packet of tissues, handing them to Sarah. You know what I think? I think you've been very, very brave for a very long time. And maybe it's okay to let other people be brave for you sometimes. Sarah looked at her father, who was still standing in the aisle looking lost and guilty and grateful all at once. Dad. Sarah's voice was small, uncertain. Ronald dropped into the seat behind them, leaning forward so he could reach both his children. Yeah, baby? I'm really tired. For words that meant so much more than they said. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being the adult. I know, Ronald said, his voice breaking. You can rest now. I've got this. The rest of the flight was quiet in the best possible way. Vivian went back to her duties. She still had an entire plane full of passengers to serve, but she checked on row 14 3 more times. Brought Sarah a ginger ale without being asked. Made sure Desmond had enough snacks. Asked Ronald if he needed anything. Dr. Wong returned to her seat, but she made a mental note to follow up with this family. To make sure they got connected with the resources they needed. She'd failed to help someone once. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Sarah moved to sit beside her father in seat 14A, and Desmond stayed in his beloved window seat with his noise-canceling headphones and trunk and a piece that had been shattered but was slowly knitting back together. Ronald had one arm around Sarah, who was leaning against his shoulder, exhausted and wrung out but somehow lighter. Like she'd been carrying a weight for 8 months and had finally been allowed to set it down. And Desmond watched the clouds. Pure white mountains of vapor drifting past the window. The ground far below, a patchwork of fields and forests and cities. The sun painting everything in gold as they flew west, chasing the afternoon. He signed to Sarah without looking away from the window, "Beautiful." Sarah signed back, "Yes. Beautiful." An hour before landing, Desmond fell asleep with his head against the window, trunk clutched to his chest, the noise-canceling headphones slightly askew on his head. He looked peaceful. He looked like what he was, a 6-year-old boy having an adventure. Sarah fell asleep too, her head on her father's shoulder, her hand reaching across the armrest to rest on Desmond's arm. Even in sleep, protecting him. Even in sleep, connected. Ronald sat between his sleeping children and cried quiet tears. Tears of gratitude and grief and the overwhelming relief of realizing that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Desmond woke up. Felt the change in altitude. Looked at Sarah with wide eyes. He signed a question. Again? Sarah laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. She signed back, maybe? If you want to. Desmond nodded enthusiastically, then pointed out the window at the city coming into view below them. They were almost there. Almost to Grandma's house. Almost to the birthday party. Almost to something that felt, impossibly, like it might actually be okay. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and passengers began the usual chaos of gathering belongings, checking phones, preparing to deplane. But row 14 was different. Calmer. Sarah helped Desmond put his picture board back in his backpack. Made sure he had trunk. Held his hand as they stood up. The aisle was crowded, people pushing forward with that inexplicable urgency that makes everyone rush off airplanes even though they're all going to end up waiting at baggage claim anyway. But passengers kept letting Sarah and Desmond go ahead. Making space. Offering small smiles. As they approached the front of the plane, Vivian was there at the door saying goodbye to passengers the way flight attendants do. But when she saw Sarah and Desmond, she paused. "Wait just a second," she said, and pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a handwritten note on airline stationery. Sarah unfolded it and saw a list of resources. Websites, phone numbers, support organizations for families with special needs children. And at the bottom, in Vivian's neat handwriting, her personal email address. "If you ever need help navigating air travel again," Vivian said, "you let me know." "I mean it." "And Sarah?" Sarah looked up at her. "Keep fighting for your brother. The world needs more people like you." Sarah didn't plan to hug her. Didn't think about it. Just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Vivian's waist, and Vivian hugged her back, tight and warm and real. When they pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes, but they were smiling. Sarah, Desmond, and Ronald walked down the jetway into the Atlanta airport terminal, and there, right at the gate, was Grandma. 75 years old, barely 5 feet tall, with the same warm brown eyes as their mother, and she was crying before they even reached her. "My babies," she said, opening her arms. "My sweet babies." Desmond, who was usually cautious with physical contact, who needed time to warm up to people, ran to her. Well, ran as much as he could while still processing the overstimulating environment of an airport. But he reached her and let her pull him into a hug, and that meant something. Sarah hung back for a moment, suddenly overcome with emotion again. Because Grandma looked so much like Mom. Same smile. Same way of holding her arms out. Same scent of lavender and vanilla. Dr. Wong appeared beside Sarah, seemingly out of nowhere. "You know," Dr. Wong said conversationally, "I work with kids who have advocates. Adults who speak for them in IEP meetings and doctor's appointments and all the official places. But I've never seen anyone fight for someone the way you fought for your brother today." Sarah looked up at her. "He can't fight for himself. So I have to." "That's what I thought you'd say." Dr. Wong smiled. "But can I tell you something? The way you advocated for him today, the words you chose, the information you had prepared, you did what trained professionals spend years learning to do. You're 10 years old and you're already better at disability advocacy than most adults I know." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. "Your brother is lucky to have you," Dr. Wong continued. "But I hope you know he'd do the same for you. Maybe not with words. Maybe not in the same way. But that kind of love? It goes both ways." "He would," Sarah said with absolute certainty. "He'd do the same for me. I believe you." Dr. Wong handed Sarah her card. "If you ever want to talk, if you ever need support, or if you just want to learn more about advocacy work, call me." Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd of travelers, and Sarah was left holding a business card that said, "Dr. Patricia Wong, Child Psychology and Family Support Services." Sarah turned back to her family. Grandma had Desmond in her arms now, and Ronald was standing beside them looking more relaxed than Sarah had seen him in months. And when she walked over, Ronald somehow managed to lift both of his children at the same time, one in each arm like he used to do when they were smaller, and Sarah laughed because she was too big for this really, but also she'd never been more grateful for anything in her life. "I love you both so much," Ronald said, his voice thick. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I haven't been there the way I should be. But that's going to change. Starting right now. We love you too, Daddy, Sarah whispered. Desmond signed it with one hand since the other was holding trunk. Love. They stood there in the middle of Atlanta's airport terminal, this little family that had been broken by loss and was slowly, painfully, beautifully learning how to be whole again. And for the first time in 8 months, Sarah Fletcher felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight of the entire world on her 10-year-old shoulders. Maybe it was okay to be a kid again. Maybe it was okay to let other people be strong too. Maybe they were all going to be okay. 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. They deserve to experience the world just like everyone else. With understanding, compassion, and advocates like Sarah, we can make that world a little bit kinder. A little bit more accessible. A little bit more just. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to get where we're going. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Here's my question for you. What would you have done if you were on that airplane? Would you have stayed silent like most of the passengers? Would you have recorded on your phone? Or would you have been like Dr. Wong and stepped in? Really think about it. Because the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, you'll have to make that choice for real. Tell me in the comments what you would do. And if this story changed something in you, if Sarah and Desmond's journey made you see disability advocacy differently, if you're sitting there thinking about that one person in your life who needs someone to fight for them, subscribe to this channel. Hit that button right now. Because stories like this, stories that challenge us to be better, to do better, to stand up when it matters, these are the stories that change the world. One person at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, the world needs more people like Sarah Fletcher. Maybe that person can be you.